Our presidents have come from many different walks of life. Many ran for office with very little name recognition, unless they were members of Congress, governors, military officers, or high-profile businessmen. Many came from humble origins, while a few were from very wealthy and influential families. Almost every presidential administration has had some controversy, and some of those elected to the White House brought their own personal baggage with them, sometimes with detrimental effects. But very few presidents entered office in such an array of combined military and federal government experience as did George Herbert Walker Bush when he was elected in 1999. But there are some issues that we will discuss. Who was George Herbert Walker Bush? What was it about his background that gave him a major advantage in politics and business? What controversies plagued his life both before and during his political service? What is his legacy, if any?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
George H.W. Bush was born on June 12, 1924, in Milton, Massachusetts, to father Prescott Bush and mother Dorothy Walker Bush. The Bush family was already a very wealthy and well-established family. Prescott Bush had been a leading force, along with many other wealthy business owners and industrialists, in trying to overthrow the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt in a bloodless soft coup using a small army of disgruntled veterans from what would be called the Bonus Army as their primary force. They felt that FDR's socialist agenda targeted the free market capitalist unjustly, and they approached retired Marine Corps Lieutenant General Smedley Butler to lead this army, but he refused and turned against them. See our videos on the Bonus Army as well as Smedley Butler, which covers several aspects of this issue. George Bush attended Greenwich County Day School from 1929 to 1937, Phillips Academy from 1937 to 1942, where he wore many hats as president of the senior class, secretary of the student council, president of the community fundraising group, a member of the editorial board of the school newspaper, and he was captain of the varsity baseball and soccer teams. When he turned 18, he joined the U.S. Navy as an aviation cadet after graduating from Phillips. He was commissioned as an ensign in the Naval Reserve at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in Texas on June 9, 1943, becoming one of the youngest pilots in the Navy and assigned to fly torpedo bombers in the Pacific, primarily the TBM Avenger, and he was assigned to the USS San Jacinto as a member of Air Group 51. Bush flew his first combat mission in May 1944, bombing Japanese-held Wake Island. A month later, Bush's bomber was hit by flak and he was forced to ditch in the ocean, where a U.S. destroyer rescued him from the sea. Bush was promoted to lieutenant junior grade on August 1, 1944. On September 2, 1944, Bush's squadron had a bombing mission against the Japanese installation on the island of Chichijima. The entire flight encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. According to the story, the Avenger's engine was hit and started to burn, yet Bush managed to release his bombs and head back toward the San Jacinto. His two crewmen, radioman second class John Delaney, situated below in the plane's belly, and turret gunner Lieutenant Junior Grade William Gardner Ted White, died. After floating on a raft for 4 hours, the submarine USS Finback rescued him. Bush returned to the San Jacinto in November 1944, participating in operations in the Philippines. By the time he was transferred stateside, Bush had flown 58 missions, completed 128 carrier landings, and recorded 1,228 hours of flight time. In December 1944, Bush was reassigned to Norfolk Naval Base in Norfolk, Virginia, where he was tasked with training new pilots. After returning from the war, Bush married Barbara Pierce in Rye, New York on January 6, 1945. In March to May 1945, he was assigned to VT-153 in Auburn, Maine, preparing for the invasion of Japan, where he and his new wife, Barbara, had a small apartment. He was officially discharged from the reserves in October 1955 and had reached the rank of lieutenant. But there were some uncomfortable issues with Bush's two missions where he was shot down. There was the status of just how badly his bomber was damaged, and if he was aware of the status of both Delaney and White in the second crash. Bush stated in an early 1980s interview with author Doug Weed that he had seen at least one parachute leaving the plane before he himself bailed out over the water near Chichijima. But Bush had given many different versions of the story. For example, in a letter to his parents after his rescue, he wrote that after the plane was hit, he had ordered his crew members to parachute out. He was uncertain what happened next. He claimed, due to the smoke that filled the cockpit, they didn't answer at all, but I looked around and couldn't see Ted in the turret, so I assumed he had gone below to get his chute fastened on. In another version, he told author Doug Weed, who wrote George Bush, Man of Integrity, quote, I looked back and saw that my rear gunner, White, was out. He had been machine gunned to death right where he was. Bush also said that he saw that White was very much in the plane before bailing out. According to Bush, one of them jumped out and his parachute streamed. They had fighter planes over us and they could see the chute open. And the other one, he was killed in the plane. You can see in a torpedo bomber the pilot is separate from the crew, but you can look over and see the turret, and he was just slumped over. But then there would be a problem with his changing story in the 1988 campaign book Looking Forward with Victor Gold, when Bush stated that his Avenger was crippled, as stated by Bush. The flak was the heaviest I'd ever flown into. Suddenly there was a jolt, as if a massive fist had crunched into the belly of the plane. Smoke poured into the cockpit, and I could see flames rippling across the crease of the wing, edging toward the fuel tanks. It should be noted that over the course of 1944, Bush's squadron suffered a 300% casualty rate among its pilots and crews, and Bush was awarded 3 air medals, and the unit received a Presidential Unit Citation. In 2002, Bush told author James Bradley for his book, Flyboys, A True Story of Courage, that he was unaware of the condition of Delaney and White when he bailed out. After Bradley had finished the interview with Bush, Bush asked if he had any information on the fate of his 2 crewmen. It still plagues me if I gave those guys enough time to get out, Bush said. Bradley would later write in his book, no one knew exactly what had happened to Ted and John that day, only that both of them died. But this story was challenged by Chester Mirzajewski, who was the gunner in the Avenger flying ahead of Bush, and Mirzajewski came forward to challenge Bush's statements. Mirzajewski had the best and most unobstructed view and could see directly into Bush's cockpit. He wrote a personal letter to the Vice President in March 1988 stating that his memory of that day was entirely different from what Bush had been saying in television interviews. Bush never responded, so Mirzajewski took his story to the New York Post in August 1988. The Post quoted the tail gunner as saying that only Bush himself had bailed out and that Bush's plane was never on fire. No smoke came out of his cockpit when he opened the canopy to bail out. I think he could have saved those lives if they were alive. I don't know that they were, but at least they had a chance if he had attempted a water landing. Many of the aviators shot down during the attack were captured and executed by the Japanese, and they were cannibalized by their captors. Bush was lucky to have not been captured and eaten, causing him to remark, "Why had I been spared, and what did God have for me?" Bush went on to receive a bachelor's degree in economics from Yale University, where he was initiated into the Skull and Bones secret society and served as the captain of the Yale baseball team. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa in 1948, George and Barbara then moved to West Texas, where he began his career in the oil industry, later co-founding Zapata Petroleum Corporation. Bush entered politics and was elected as the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party in 1966, and he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas 7th District. In 1968, Bush endorsed Richard Nixon in the presidential election and was considered as his running mate, but Nixon chose Maryland Governor Spiro Agnew. Then, in 1970, Bush ran for the U.S. Senate and won the primary, but was defeated by Democrat Lloyd Bentsen. Bush was tapped as ambassador to the UN during the period when United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 2758 to expel the Republic of China, meaning Taiwan, and replace it with the People's Republic of China in October 1971. But Nixon and Bush were at odds, with Nixon supporting Pakistan and Bush supporting India during the 1971 crisis, when Bush supported an Indian motion at the UN General Assembly to condemn the Pakistani government of Yahya Khan for waging genocide in East Pakistan, which is now, today, Bangladesh. He referred to the tradition which we have supported that the human rights question transcended domestic jurisdiction and should be freely debated. In 1972, the United States was charged with intentionally bombing civilian dams and dikes in North Vietnam. Nixon sent Bush to convince UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim that the United States did not intentionally target those sites. Bush was unwilling to press his assigned case that the dikes had been spared, and he told reporters, "I think that the best thing I can do on the subject is shut up." In 1974, Bush was made chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in the People's Republic of China, making him the de facto ambassador to China. In January 1976, President Gerald R. Ford appointed Bush as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Due to the Vietnam War and Watergate, as well as failed covert operations, the CIA's reputation was in tatters, and the CIA was shrouded in controversy from the leak of the family jewels. The Family Jewels was an internal report detailing controversial activities undertaken by the agency dating back to President Dwight Eisenhower's administration. Representatives Otis Pike and Senator Frank Church started hearings and, in 1975, created the Church Committee to determine the extent, if any, to which illegal, improper, or unethical activities were engaged in by any agency of the federal government. These were indeed dark days for the agency. Bush was given the task of rehabilitating the image and raising morale in the CIA, as well as performing damage control with regard to public relations, but there was still a job to do. The CIA and NSA actively supported Operation Condor, supporting right-wing anti-communist military dictatorships in Latin America. Bush balanced his position quickly, connecting with CIA's workforce, where he was friendly and outgoing. As the new director was enthusiastic about meeting CIA officers and was always interested in hearing their ideas and opinions. Bush also welcomed the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, where he gave many closed-door briefings of CIA covert action operations and programs, appearing before Congress 51 times during his year in office, setting a record that no other DCI matched. In 1976, when Jimmy Carter was elected president, Bush called and offered his resignation, which Carter accepted on January 10, 1977. Bush then became vice president under Ronald Reagan, and he was mired in the Iraq-Iran war scandal when it was revealed in 1986 that administration officials had secretly arranged weapon sales to Iran during the Iran-Iraq war. The money from Iran was used to fund the Contra rebels in their fight against the leftist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Since congressional Democrats had passed a law that prohibited appropriated funds for that program, the administration then used non-appropriated funds from the weapon sales. When the scandal became public, Bush stated that he had been out of the loop and unaware of the diversion of funds. Biographer John Meacham writes that no evidence was ever produced proving Bush was aware of the diversion to the Contras, but he criticizes Bush's out-of-the-loop characterization, writing that the record is clear that Bush was aware that the United States, in contravention of its own stated policy, was trading arms for hostages. The Iran-Contra scandal did serious damage to the Reagan presidency, and Congress established the Tower Commission to investigate, and, at Reagan's request, a panel of federal judges appointed Lawrence Walsh as a special prosecutor charged with investigating the Iran-Contra scandal. The investigations continued after Reagan left office, and though Bush was never charged with a crime, the Iran-Contra scandal would remain a political liability for him. So what did he really know? After all, he was in the intelligence loop. However, Bush's knowledge of Iran-Contra came to the forefront during his live interview with CBS Evening News anchorman Dan Rather in January 1988. Bush stated, "I went along with it because you know why, Dan? Because I worried when I saw, meaning captured Beirut CIA station chief Mr. Buckley, heard about Mr. Buckley being tortured to death," Bush told Rather. "So if I erred on the side of trying to get those hostages out of there. May I explain out of the loop? No operational role." On July 3, 1988, the guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes accidentally shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing 290 passengers. Bush defended the action at the UN that the U.S. ships had previously been attacked and the crew of the Vincennes had acted correctly. On December 20, 1989, Bush ordered the invasion of Panama, Operation Just Cause, in order to remove General Manuel Noriega, who, though at one time of service to the U.S. government, had become notorious for his brutality and his involvement in the drug trade, as well as his attacks against Americans, which pushed his hand. The four-day invasion resulted in hundreds of deaths, mostly of Panamanians, and the operation was denounced by both the Organization of American States and the UN General Assembly. Bush pushed for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and after the bill passed both houses of Congress, Bush signed it into law in July 1990. Then followed the Immigration Act of 1990, which led to a 40% increase in legal immigration to the United States and doubled the number of visas given to immigrants on the basis of job skills. Following the savings and loan crisis, Bush proposed a $50 billion package to rescue the savings and loans industry, and also proposed the creation of the Office of Thrift Supervision to regulate the industry. Congress passed the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989, which incorporated most of Bush's proposals. In August 1990, Bush signed the Ryan White Care Act to assist people living with HIV/AIDS. As the AIDS epidemic exploded in the U.S. and around the world, AIDS activist groups criticized him for not placing a high priority on HIV/AIDS research and funding. In August 1990, Iraq invaded and occupied Kuwait, and Bush led a worldwide UN-approved embargo against Iraq to force its withdrawal and send a U.S. military contingent to Saudi Arabia to counteract Iraqi pressure and intimidation. As many as 350,000 Kuwaiti refugees also fled south into Saudi Arabia. Perhaps his most significant diplomatic achievement was the skillful construction of a coalition of Western European and Arab states against Iraq. Over the objections of those who favored restraint, Bush increased the U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Shield to about 500,000 troops within just a few months. Despite the opposition of a majority of Democrats in both the House and the Senate, Congress approved the authorization for use of military force against Iraq resolution of 1991 should force be required. When Saddam Hussein refused to withdraw from Kuwait, Bush authorized a U.S.-led air offensive that began on January 16-17, 1991. Operation Desert Storm had begun. The ensuing Persian Gulf War culminated in an Allied ground offensive in late February that restored Kuwait's independence. Saddam Hussein lost 30 infantry, 4 mechanized and 7 armored divisions, as well as 3,008 tanks, 1,856 armored vehicles, and 2,140 artillery pieces, totaling upward of 30,000 to 50,000 military deaths. The numbers, as of today, are still in dispute. Approximately 1,000 coalition troops were wounded. The United States had 96 soldiers killed in action, 2 died of wounds, and 105 non-hostile deaths. Air asset losses were 46 aircrew pilots killed or missing, 8 captured, with 52 fixed-wing aircraft and 23 helicopters lost. 407 Iraqi aircraft are either destroyed or flown to Iran and permanently impounded there, out of a total of 750 fixed-wing aircraft in their inventory. Following the ceasefire of March 3rd and the United Nations passing a resolution establishing a peacekeeping force and a demilitarized zone between Kuwait and Iraq, Bush had an approval rating of 89%, the highest presidential approval rating in the history of Gallup polling. After 1991, Bush pushed the United Nations to maintain economic sanctions against Iraq, and the United Nations Special Commission was assigned to ensure that Iraq did not revive its weapons of mass destruction program. There were rumors that Bush and his oil company interest had supported Kuwait side drilling into Iraqi oil fields and then using the opportunity to invade Iraq to take the oil reserves as war reparations. Bush oversaw the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union and the reunification of Germany, and he met with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in Paris and signed a mutual non-aggression pact in November 1990, effectively ending the Cold War. They also signed treaties sharply reducing the number of weapons that the two superpowers had stockpiled over the decades of Cold War hostility. Just before he left office, Bush ordered a U.S. military-led mission to feed the starving citizens of war-torn Somalia, thereby placing U.S. Marines in the middle of warring factions. Bill Clinton would inherit that problem. See our video on Clinton. Equally as controversial was his pardoning of 6 Reagan administration officials charged with illegal actions associated with the Iran-Contra affair. In the 1992 election, Bush lost to Clinton by a popular vote of 37% to Clinton's 43%, while Ross Perot, the independent, garnered an impressive 19% of the vote. The Bush family formed a partnership with former President Bill Clinton to develop and to help raise financial relief for victims of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005, and Hurricane Ike in 2008. President Bush was the author of 2 books, Looking Forward and A World Transformed, co-authored with General Brent Scowcroft. His personal writings served as the basis for 2 additional books, All the Best, George Bush, My Life in Letters and Other Writings, and The China Diary of George H.W. Bush, The Making of a Global President. The 2008 book, Family of Secrets by Russ Baker, alleged that President George H.W. Bush was linked to the Watergate scandal and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. However, his work has been criticized. Bush died on November 30, 2018 in Houston, Texas, after a long battle with vascular Parkinson's disease.
George H.W. Bush lost the 1992 presidential election to Democrat Bill Clinton following an economic recession, conservative independent Ross Perot running as a third candidate taking Republican votes away from Bush, and Bush's turnaround on his tax promise, and the decreased emphasis of foreign policy after the Gulf War in a post-Cold War political climate. Bill Clinton was young, played a saxophone on popular entertainment shows, and came across as a moderate Democrat. He promised prosperity and a social platform that was attractive to a population that was economically exhausted. Both Democrats and Republicans have their stellar entries and most corrupt for various reasons, usually with regard to their political activities, often being self-serving. Now we examine the presidency of William Jefferson Clinton, who accomplished much as president, but he also brought his own controversies into the White House with him. Who is Bill Clinton? Was he a successful president? What were his controversies? How far back did his alleged criminal activities extend? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. William Jefferson Clinton was born on August 19, 1946 in Hope, Arkansas. He graduated from Georgetown University in 1968 and later from Yale Law School, where he met his future wife, Hillary Rodham. After graduating from Yale, he became the state attorney general, then served 2 non-consecutive terms as governor of Arkansas. While governor, Bill Clinton's brother, Roger Clinton's drug addiction and drug dealing saw him arrested in 1984 as part of a sting operation in Arkansas, ironically overseen by his state and federal law enforcement. Bill was apparently unaware that Roger was involved, or so he said. Per the United States International, Roger was charged with 5 counts of distributing cocaine and 1 count of conspiracy to sell cocaine. Following the indictment of Roger, Bill publicly discussed his feelings about the controversy, calling it a time of great pain and sadness for his family. Clinton would later pardon his brother, who would still run afoul of the law later for DUI in California. Clinton's 2-term presidency was rather successful and saw the longest period of peacetime economic expansion in American history. He opened foreign markets and investments and worked with Republicans and helped create the conditions for a record 115 months of economic growth. He signed the controversial North American Free Trade Agreement, which cost American jobs eventually, after his presidency, in his 2nd term, with companies moving overseas for cheaper operating costs and labor, creating an imbalance in trade with Mexico and Canada. But Clinton's economic policies were a mixed bag, such as his pushing for China to be accepted into the World Trade Organization, which has proven to have been an unnecessary self-inflicted wound and proven failure that has now metastasized. China offered cheap labor for foreign companies to operate by using slave labor in many cases, and imposed strict Communist Party controls over those businesses to include access to proprietary and trade secret information. The relaxed relations with China saw the theft of U.S. nuclear weapons secrets and other sensitive information by Chinese nationals living in the U.S., and total inaction by Clinton, who allegedly received campaign donations from China violating the law. A House committee had prepared a classified report on the matter, and a Senate panel planned an investigation. The result of this investigation was posted by the Los Angeles Times, who reported the chief of China's military intelligence secretly directed funds from Beijing to help re-elect President Clinton in 1996, former Democratic fundraiser Johnny Chung has told investigators. A $300,000 Chinese deposit into Chung's account was funneled into the Clinton campaign account, which was corroborated by financial records in the United States and Hong Kong, according to law enforcement and other sources. Chung says he met 3 times with the intelligence official, General Ji Shengde, who ordered $300,000 deposited into the Torrance businessman's bank account to subsidize campaign donations intended for Clinton's 1996 re-election campaign, according to sources familiar with Chung's sealed statements to federal prosecutors. During their initial meeting on August 11, 1996, in Hong Kong, Xi conveyed to Chung the Chinese government's specific interest in supporting Clinton. This was a quid pro quo for allowing China into the World Trade Organization, beginning the offshoring of American jobs. Chung pled guilty to violations of election laws, resulting in a sentence of probation and community service. Bill Clinton also signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Acts into law in an attempt to take repeat offenders off the streets and increase the numbers of police nationwide, but he failed to pass national health care reform. President Clinton's 1994 crime bill enacted a new initiative to increase local law enforcement by 100,000 police officers. He also signed into law the Family and Medical Leave Act, which helped 20 million Americans. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Clinton enlarged NATO to include the former Soviet satellites of Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, and convinced Russian troops to withdraw from Poland and the Baltic states. However, Clinton's methods fell under intense scrutiny. He supported President Boris Yeltsin and funneled billions of dollars in loans to Russia from the International Monetary Fund, bypassing congressional scrutiny and approval. In 1999, evidence suggested that much of the borrowed money was in fact stolen by an organized criminal syndicate, which included members of Yeltsin's own family. The Clinton-Gore administration oversaw the dismantling of more than 1,700 nuclear warheads, 300 launchers, and 425 land and submarine-based missiles from the former Soviet Union, and these efforts in nuclear arms reductions removed the likelihood of a nuclear exchange between the superpowers. During his 8 years in office, 22 million jobs were created in less than 8 years, the most ever under a single administration, and more than were created in the previous 12 years. The home ownership rate also increased from 64.2% in 1992 to 67.7%, the highest rate ever until the Trump administration, with the lowest unemployment than in the previous 10 years, only exceeded by the Trump administration from 2017 to 2020. Education standards and school choice increased, and education and training investment, as well as financial aid for students, doubled by increasing Pell Grants to the largest award ever, expanding federal work study to allow 1 million students to work their way through college. Also, 95% of schools were connected to the internet. Clinton's era also witnessed the lowest crime rate in 26 years. His administration also had the smallest welfare rolls in 32 years, again only to be exceeded by the Trump administration. After falling by nearly $2,000 between 1988 and 1992, the median family's income rose by $6,338 after adjusting for inflation, created the lowest poverty rate in 20 years. Another benefit was the lowest teen birth rate in 60 years and the lowest infant mortality rate in American history. Between 1998 and 2000, the national debt was reduced by $363 billion and the largest three-year debt paydown in American history, converting the largest budget deficit into the largest surplus in history, assisted by the lowest government spending in 3 decades. Clinton also enacted specific cuts such as the Earned Income Tax Credit expansion, $500 child tax credit, and the Hope Scholarship and Lifetime Learning Tax credits. He also appointed more African Americans, women, and Hispanics to cabinet positions than any other president in history until Joseph Biden, who eclipsed Clinton in diversity hires, which has unfortunately damaged the country. His foreign policy was also somewhat interesting. Weeks before Clinton took office, outgoing President George H.W. Bush had sent American troops into Somalia on a humanitarian mission to combat famine, but it fell apart in a bloody fight on October 3, 1993, at the Battle of Mogadishu. The public was appalled, and Clinton withdrew all U.S. forces by March 1994, replaced by UN peacekeeping troops until 1995. Somalia was a totally ill-advised failure, and that country still does not have a functioning government today. The failure of the Somalia mission and disastrous outcome led to the resignation of Secretary of Defense Les Aspin and created the impression of a president who was exceptional on domestic issues but totally incompetent in foreign affairs. But this would not be Clinton's last questionable foreign policy controversy. 1994 was very eventful, as Clinton managed to have Russia withdraw troops from the Baltic republics of Estonia and Latvia after the collapse of the USSR, which was considered a remarkable success, and rightly so. Then, Clinton sent 20,000 troops to Bosnia, which is predominantly Muslim, to join NATO peacekeepers after a civil war broke out in the former Yugoslavia after a bombing in Sarajevo in 1994 and another in 1995. NATO launched a heavy bombing campaign against the Serbs over strife between Yugoslavia and ethnic Albanians in the Serbian province of Kosovo, but without considering the evidence. Many believed that it was to bolster his international image. After Somalia, Clinton attempted to remove Haitian strongman Raul Cedras, who had overthrown Haiti's president Jean-Bertrand Aristide in a 1991 coup. Former President Jimmy Carter stepped in to negotiate with the brutal military dictator for his removal from power. Cedras, accompanied by retired General Colin Powell and Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat from Georgia, Carter communicated Clinton's threat to invade unless the generals of the junta relinquished power. With American planes in the air overhead, the generals buckled and agreed to leave. The United States military was sent to enforce the agreement, but the troops were eventually withdrawn. But in April 1994, a genocidal massacre erupted in Rwanda, where an estimated 800,000 Tutsi and others were murdered by the government. Clinton did nothing to intervene, relying upon the United Nations. See our video, The Real Hotel Rwanda, on the Rwandan genocide. According to journalist Seymour Hersh, who wrote in The New Yorker on November 1, 1993, that Clinton's first bombing of Baghdad on June 26, 1993, which killed 8 civilians, was ostensibly for an attempt by Saddam Hussein to kill ex-President George H.W. Bush. But in fairness to Bill Clinton, there was some truth to this allegation, and Saddam had also violated several conditions of the 1991 Gulf War ceasefire agreement. Clinton then again bombed Iraqi air defenses and some civilians on September 3rd and 4th, 1996, to make Saddam Hussein pay a price for sending troops to Kurdish Iraq and for flagrant violations of the northern and southern no-fly zones and for using poison gas. This was considered a political move since the U.S. presidential voting was only 2 months away. By showing toughness, he could further his re-election after being called wishy-washy and anti-military. One writer believed that Clinton, in expectation of cheap oil and huge aircraft sales, intentionally advanced Saudi desires for an Islamic state in Europe. But Bill Clinton's foreign actions were soon to become the subject of investigations and public scrutiny as to his real motivations, as personal scandals exploded and threatened his presidency. Civil war finally broke out in the former Yugoslavia between Serbs, Bosnian Muslims, and the ethnic Albanian Kosovo population, which was also Muslim. The United Nations was involved and Clinton authorized a bombing campaign, but the timing was in question, and here's why. Again, according to Hersh, Clinton had been mired in controversy over his Bosnia policy, and White House staffers advised that bombing Baghdad would improve Clinton's political standing at home and his diplomatic standing in the Middle East. Past and present intelligence officials told Hersh the acceptance of the Q80 allegation was based on conflicting and dubious evidence. Political leaders were also starting their own investigations into Clinton, dating back to his days as Arkansas Attorney General and Governor. The Whitewater scandal arose when it was determined that Bill and Hillary Clinton, along with their friends Jim and Susan McDougal, bought 230 acres of riverfront land for $203,000 with the intention of selling it as vacation home lots, as reported by the New York Times. The deal was ultimately a bust, and Jim McDougal bought a savings and loan association and renamed it Madison Guarantee. He ultimately defrauded both Madison Guarantee and another small business investment firm called Capital Management Services to the tune of $3 million. According to the New York Times, the scheme cost the federal government, or the taxpayer, around $73 million, and 15 people were charged for their role in the scandal. Jim McDougal died in prison in 1998. The Clintons, however, were never charged and were never accused of wrongdoing in this event. They have adamantly maintained they had no involvement, which may be true. Questions about the Whitewater dealings, however, surfaced during Clinton's 1992 bid for the presidency, with the Justice Department eventually opening an investigation into the matter and an illegal $300,000 loan provided to the McDougals. 1 month prior to his death, attorney Vince Foster had filed 3 years of delinquent Whitewater corporate tax returns and was said to be plagued by the evolving ethics investigations into the Clintons. The media went wild. But other more serious accusations were coming. The problem started when a woman named Juanita Broaddrick, in a 1999 interview on Dateline NBC, alleged that Clinton raped her on April 25, 1978 in a motel room during a gubernatorial campaign stop. According to Broaddrick, she agreed to meet with Clinton for coffee in the lobby of her hotel, but Clinton asked if they could go to her room to avoid a crowd of reporters, and she agreed. Quoting Broaddrick, "He turned me around and started kissing me, and that was a real shock. I first pushed him away. I just told him no. He tries to kiss me again. He starts biting on my lip, and then he forced me down on the bed. I was just very frightened. I tried to get away from him. I told him no. He wouldn't listen to me." Broaddrick stated that Clinton injured her lip by biting it during the rape. She said that Clinton told her to put some ice on that. Broaddrick called Hillary Clinton an enabler of her husband's behavior. She also accused Hillary Clinton of pressuring her not to speak about the rape back in 1978. In a 1998 NBC interview wherein she detailed the alleged rape, Broaddrick said she had denied under oath being raped only to avoid testifying about the ordeal publicly. "Bill Clinton raped me and Hillary Clinton threatened me," she said. But she also apparently said there was a witness, an Arkansas state trooper who drove Clinton, and he was in the motel. More problems arose for Clinton when Gennifer Flowers came forward during the 1992 presidential campaign and said she had been Clinton's mistress for over a decade. Immediately after the allegations surfaced, Clinton denied having a relationship with Flowers in an interview on 60 Minutes, with Hillary sitting beside him. In 1998, Clinton admitted to having a sexual relationship with Flowers, but he stated it only occurred once in 1977. A campaign staffer, Sandra Allen James, accused Clinton of sexually assaulting her in his hotel room in 1991. She claimed that he exposed himself to her and forced her to conduct oral sex on him while they were sitting on the couch. But things only got worse when Paula Jones alleged that, in 1991, Clinton coaxed her to a hotel room where he made unwanted sexual advances towards her, including dropping his pants and asking her for oral sex. In 1994, Jones filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against Clinton that in 1998, the Washington Post said opened a Pandora's box of allegations about Clinton's past sex life and made him the first sitting president ever interrogated under oath as a defendant in a civil lawsuit or before a grand jury as a criminal target. Discovery proceedings in the Jones lawsuit also played a role in uncovering the Lewinsky scandal. Clinton and Jones reached a settlement in 1998 in which Clinton agreed to pay Jones $850,000 but admitted no wrongdoing. Clinton's attorney, Robert S. Bennett, maintained the allegations were baseless after the settlement was reached, although there was evidence. And there would be others, such as Elizabeth Ward Grayson, Kathleen Willey, Dolly Kyle Browning, Leslie Milwee, Eileen Wellstone, Karen Hinton, and Sally Perdue, also known as Myra Bell Miller, a former Miss Arkansas. However, the most explosive situation occurred when Monica Lewinsky entered the picture. Their sexual relationship began in 1995 when Lewinsky was 22 years old and lasted 18 months, ending in 1997. Clinton was impeached for lying during the investigation after DNA on the famous blue dress was proven to be his semen. Later, he admitted to the affair. Linda Tripp, a career civil servant, moved from the White House to the Pentagon and began taping conversations she had with Monica Lewinsky, the former White House intern who had just begun working in the Pentagon with her. In the tapes, Lewinsky detailed the affair she had been having with President Clinton since November 1995.
I never expected to feel this way about him, and I'm not kidding you.
Lewinsky later told prosecutors that Clinton encouraged her to be evasive to investigators during the meeting. The lies helped him weather the initial squall, shore up Democratic support, and push back against his accusers. The lies saved me, the president confided to a close friend, according to journalist John Harris's book, The Survivor, perhaps the finest book on the Clinton presidency. It was not until the summer of 1998, when we learned that Monica Lewinsky had preserved the famed blue dress, did Clinton grudgingly concede the truth on national television. A poll taken immediately after the speech showed that a favorable rating of 60% 5 days earlier had dropped to 40%. On December 19, 1998, President Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives and charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. However, the case was dismissed by the Senate. After his lies were exposed, Clinton requested airtime from the networks for a televised confession. Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. But then he carpet-bombed his accusers for mounting a politically inspired investigation led by Kenneth Starr. This has gone on too long, cost too much, and hurt too many innocent people. This time the strategy backfired, with senior Democrats such as Senator Dianne Feinstein expressing dismay. Senator Joe Lieberman, a Democrat and Orthodox Jew who had long seen himself as a moral elder, condemned him on the floor of the Senate. Many were appalled by Clinton's behavior. With his scandals mounting as well as his impeachment story, on March 24, 1999, Clinton ordered an 11-week bombing campaign which replaced Clinton on the TV news and newspaper front pages. The U.S. and other NATO forces hit the Serbs with air-launched missiles, bombs, and bullets. Again, the timing was suspect. But the sex scandals were not going away, and on August 20th, Clinton bombed Afghanistan and the Sudan. The news upstaged the Lewinsky scandal. Clinton claimed he was fighting terrorists, but it was soon discovered that one of his terrorist targets was Sudan's only medicinal factory, indicating haste in planning the raids for political reasons. In early December 1998, the biggest news concerned impending congressional proceedings on the impeachment of Clinton. The question was scheduled for House floor debate on Thursday the 17th, with voting likely the next day. On Wednesday the 16th, Clinton again bombed Iraq, claiming it was not cooperating with UN inspectors. Consequently, the House postponed the impeachment matter for a day, and Iraq took over the headlines. Killing a couple of hundred Iraqis, the bombings continued until impeachment was voted upon on December 19th. Controversy would arise again in 2001. During Bill Clinton's last day in office, he would pardon more than 100 people who'd been convicted of crimes in an act that's become known as the clemency caper. According to a statement released by the White House, the divisive list included the former president's brother, as reported by CBS News. He was pardoned for his 1984 arrest for cocaine possession, although he had already served his full sentence in prison. Roger would be arrested for drunk driving less than 2 months after he was pardoned. In 2016, while his sister-in-law Hillary was running for president, TMZ reported that Roger was arrested yet again for a DUI. Charges of sexual misconduct on Bill Clinton's part resurfaced during the 2016 presidential campaign of Hillary Clinton, when a lewd recording of Hillary's opponent, Donald Trump, discussing the ability to grope women when in power or by being famous was released during the campaign. Broderick, Willie, and Jones re-emerged as critics of Hillary Clinton, accusing her of enabling her husband's alleged sexual assaults on them. 2 days after the release of the recording, they appeared as guests at the second 2016 presidential debate in reference to Bill Clinton in pre-debate statements. Then, in November 2017, sources within the Democratic Party told author and former foreign editor of Newsweek, Edward Klein, that Clinton was being accused of sexual assault by 4 more women. The plaintiffs alleged that the assaults took place shortly after the end of his presidency in the early 2000s, while they were in their late teens. A member of Clinton's legal team confirmed the existence of new allegations against him. By late 2017, the sexual abuse allegations against Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, with liberals and feminists reconsidering their lack of support for the alleging women at the time. Michelle Goldberg wrote that Broderick's allegations meant that Bill Clinton no longer has a place in decent society. The hypocrisy of women must be believed unless it was Bill Clinton faded away. When asked in 2018 whether he would have approached the sexual misconduct allegations differently in the wake of the Me Too movement, Clinton said that he would not. When he was asked if he owed Lewinsky a personal apology, Clinton said that he did not. Bill Clinton did a lot that was positive as president, but he was able to work with Republicans to accomplish domestic goals for the nation. However, his personal life is a different story. In recent years, the Clinton Foundation has also fallen under severe scrutiny for the failure to actually provide financial relief to organizations and nations for which it touted. Allegations being made that the foundation is simply an illegal foreign donation machine to bolster their personal wealth and political objectives. William Jefferson Clinton had high positive milestones as president, but he also had personal controversies that the mainstream media chose to ignore and, in fact, still cover up today.
And that is why, in the shadow of the old state capitol, where Lincoln once called on a house divided to stand together, where common hopes and common dreams still live, I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
Many on the left claim that President Donald J. Trump was one of the most divisive and corrupt presidents in history. But is that really true? Many will say the degradation of race relationships occurred under the watch of his predecessor, President Barack Obama. Obama made the claim that, quote, "My administration is free of scandal." Well, let's put that statement to the test, shall we? Did our first black president improve race relations or hurt it? How would Barack Obama be considered one of the most corrupt? What did he do or allow to be done that was unethical, if not illegal? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Did President Obama help race relations or hurt it? Here are some clear cases showing he did not help at all. The 2009 arrest of Harvard University professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. after a 911 call of a break-in at his property, which was later cleared up, prompted Obama to jump to a racial conclusion, saying the white police officer involved acted stupidly, insinuating a racial motive. Obama later called the police officer, Sergeant James Crowley, to apologize for the comment, but the public went crazy with it. The Florida Trayvon Martin case in 2012 saw Obama immediately take up the case against the shooter George Zimmerman, inflaming racial tensions by saying in a White House speech that, quote, if he had a son, that child would look like Trayvon.
This is a tragedy.
Before there was an investigation tainting public opinion. The truth came out during the trial that Martin attacked Zimmerman, who shot Martin in self-defense, which Obama never mentioned. This was the start of the Black Lives Matter movement, created upon a lie, but it wouldn't be the last. In 2014, Michael Brown was killed by Ferguson, Missouri police officer Darren Wilson, who responded to an assault and robbery call, and Obama sided with the Democrat race baiters, BLM, that it was an unwarranted shooting, calling in the murder, spurring BLM types.
Over the past year, we've come to see more clearly than ever the frustration in many communities of color and the feeling that our laws can be applied unevenly. After Ferguson, I said that we have to face these issues squarely.
The great lie was that Brown had his hands up saying, "Don't shoot." The eyewitnesses later stated Brown, who had just stolen merchandise from a convenience store and assaulted the owner, never put his hands up and reached into the police car, and forensic evidence proved that Brown attacked Officer Wilson and tried to take his weapon. His DNA was found on the car door, the pistol, the holster, and Wilson's uniform. Wilson was exonerated, but his life and career were over, all because of this event and the lie perpetrated by President Obama and Black Lives Matter. These racial tensions and the charges started the riots and laid the groundwork for the future domestic terrorist group BLM, also known as Burn, Loot, Murder, for their violence for the slightest unfounded provocation. As a result of this instigation, more police officers have been murdered in retaliation for perceived injustices by BLM and Antifa supporters, totally supported by the Democratic coalition. During the war on terrorism, Obama changed the military rules of engagement in 2009 and 2010, which restrained troops from firing in order to spare civilian casualties, cut back on airstrikes and artillery strikes, the types of support that protect troops during raids and ambushes.
Americans are deeply ambivalent about war, but having fought for our independence, we know a price must be paid for freedom.
The results were double the casualties suffered by coalition forces, especially Americans, and many more casualties suffered by civilians targeted by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. The military was not allowed to take the offensive action against known targets. Rather, they were a reaction force to hostility, and even then, they were restricted in their response levels. The Iran nuclear deal is another scandal. Obama led the European Union coalition in giving Iran the green light to nuclear capability. The agreement was supposedly not for nuclear weapons, only nuclear energy, and was subject to unannounced inspections and verification at the established facilities. Soon after all sanctions against Iran were lifted and billions of dollars of Iranian assets were returned, Iran then made their facilities secure military installations that could not be accessed for inspection, therefore violating the agreement.
I'm hearing a lot of talking points being repeated about this is a bad deal. This is a historically bad deal. this will threaten Israel and threaten the world and threaten the United States. I mean, there's been a lot of that.
But Obama did nothing about it. In addition, Obama did nothing when Iranian gunboats took several U.S. sailors prisoner in international waters. Obama then gave Iran $1.7 billion in cash in various currencies, even after Iran was proven to be the supplier of IEDs used in Iraq and Afghanistan and were supporting terrorist groups. $400 million in cash was sent the same day that Tehran agreed to release 4 American prisoners. With Obama's approval, Attorney Eric Holder used the Department of Justice to block voter ID and signature verification in federal elections in every state, as it would make voter fraud much easier and benefit Democrats. That was a violation of federal voting laws and also a violation of the 10th Amendment as a state's rights issue on establishing their own state voting rules. Fast and Furious was part of Project Gunrunner, a program of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The idea behind Project Gunrunner was to supposedly stem the flow of firearms into Mexico by interdicting straw purchasers and gun traffickers within the United States. The plan changed when these buyers were deliberately recruited to purchase the weapons, send them to Mexico as to allow traceable firearms to be tracked. None of the targeted high-level cartel figures have ever been arrested as a result. In the Tucson and Phoenix area, the ATF purposely allowed licensed firearms dealers to sell weapons with GPS trackers, but the plan was doomed to failure as the limited battery life on the tracking chips was not considered. This also was not a congressionally approved operation, violating U.S. federal laws for a number of reasons, resulting in U.S. border agent Brian Terry being killed in December 2010 by one of these weapons. That was when it began to fall apart. House Republicans approved a measure to hold Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt of Congress when he refused to hand over documents after February 4, 2011. They acknowledged that hundreds had been killed and wounded as a result of the ridiculous program. Mexican prosecutor Patricia Gonzalez's brother was murdered along with 200 others through Operation Fast and Furious. Regarding the deaths, on December 8, 2011, Holder admitted before the House Judiciary Committee, quote, "Unfortunately, I think that's true regarding to the deaths. Very corrupt and no accountability. At Holder's request, Obama invoked executive privilege. If he had not, Holder would have gone to prison and Obama may have been impeached." In 2016, a federal court ruled that privilege does not cover criminal acts, as Richard Nixon learned. A House lawsuit to try to recover the records was settled and the matter was dropped in April 2019 after control of the House had shifted to Democrats. They protected Obama's and Holder's illegal activities. We already have a video on Benghazi, but this cover-up is too good to let pass. After Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Undersecretary Patrick Kennedy abandoned Ambassador Chris Stevens and his team to die, to include withholding U.S. military support despite assets being in the region, the cover-up started. Clinton, Obama, and Susan Rice immediately tried to blame the well-planned, well-coordinated terrorist attack which followed the death of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to cover up a weapons shipment operation. Christy Rogers, wife of HPSCI Chairman Mike Rogers and President and CEO of Aegis Defense Services, LLC, a major Democrat donor, won the large global security contract from the State Department for Benghazi. However, in one of the most insane decisions in recent history, they subcontracted the security of the compound to the 17 February Martyrs Brigade, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. They were responsible for security guards and had opened the SMC gates to the attackers and then joined in on the attack. The cover-up started immediately as Clinton, Susan Rice, and others hit all the network and cable news shows, telling the world that the attack was the result of an anti-Islamic video spurring a spontaneous reaction, therefore the attack. Clinton even lied under oath during her congressional hearings with Obama's approval. In essence, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama allowed good men to die to cover up a bad political decision, then arrested and prosecuted an innocent man to cover it up. It was a political season, after all. That was the main reason Clinton had to try and destroy all the emails maintained on her illegal server in violation of the National Security Act, and then destroyed all communication devices despite a legal congressional subpoena. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, used a civilian, unencrypted, and therefore illegal computer server in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1924, which covers unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or materials. At issue are 4 sections of the law that she violated: the Federal Records Act, the Freedom of Information Act, National Security Act, the National Archives and Records Administration's regulations, and Section 1924 of Title 18 of the U.S. Crimes and Criminal Procedure Code.
I made a mistake using a private email.
That's for sure.
And if I had to do it over again, I would obviously do it differently. But I'm not going to make any excuses. It was a mistake, and I take responsibility for that.
Bowe Bergdahl, the U.S. Army deserter and some call traitor, went to the Taliban, deserting his post on June 30, 2009, later costing the lives of soldiers. At least 6 soldiers from his own battalion were killed during the search and others wounded looking for him. He was traded for the Taliban 5, who were transferred from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to custody in Doha, Qatar, and they are Mohammed Fazl, Kairala Kakara, Abdul Haq Wasik, Arullah Nuri, and Mohammed Nabi Omari. They were the Taliban Army Chief of Staff, a Taliban Deputy Minister of Intelligence, a former Taliban Interior Minister, and 2 other senior Taliban figures.
I just finished speaking with Secretary Lew and senior officials at the Treasury Department to discuss the investigation into IRS personnel who improperly screened conservative groups applying for tax-exempt status.
The IRS scandal of 2013 refers to the Internal Revenue Service's disclosure that it had targeted conservative, religious, and Tea Party groups. They also refused tax exemption for those charities, nonprofits, and religious organizations that were not clearly leaning towards Democrats. Democrat-supported organizations had no such impediments. Director Lois Lerner, under the direction of Eric Holder and possibly Barack Obama, unleashed the power of the criminal IRS activities to target political and ideological opponents. According to the Washington Times in 2017, Lerner and her former deputy, Holly Paz, asked a federal judge to seal in perpetuity tapes and depositions they gave in a court case. The fallout was fierce and led to the resignation of Lerner, but there was no real accountability. The U.S. Department of Justice secretly obtained telephone records of conservative reporters and editors for the Associated Press wire service in 2012. The most high-profile was Fox News correspondent James Rosen. No probable cause was offered and no warrants issued. Wiretaps and records confiscation were authorized by Eric Holder, all without legal precedent and in violation of the First and Fifth Amendments. Obama lied to the American people when he told them that the Affordable Care Act would not affect insurance policies or doctor-patient relationships, but people lost their insurance or were forced to pay for additional coverage that they did not need and could not afford.
So this is just an example of how the Affordable Care Act is doing what it's designed to do: deliver more choices, better benefits, a check on rising costs, and higher quality health care. That's what it was designed to do, and we're already seeing those effects take place.
In addition, Obama took $500 million from Medicare to fund it until his mandatory coverage tax recouped the money, forcing employers with over 50 full-time employees to carry the unaffordable insurance. As a result, employers reduced their workforce or made their full-time employees part-time so as to not to have the expense. Sometimes they just fired people. This started the stagnation of the economy, and GDP never rose above 3% as a result, mostly hovering in the 1.6% domain for the rest of his administration. It was challenged in the Supreme Court, who ruled that it was legal as a tax, as Congress can make laws and levy taxes. But remember, Obama promised that it would not be mandatory or a tax. He lied.
So we're going to keep fighting to secure that right, to make sure that every American gets the care that they need, when they need it, at a price they can afford. That's the America we believe in. That's what families deserve. That's what we're going to keep on working to deliver. We're going to keep on working to make sure many people around this country who are already paying premiums are getting cheaper prices, that the money's being actually spent on their health care.
Obama overstepped his presidential authority when he imposed the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, also known as the Dreamers Act, by executive order. This was basically amnesty for illegal aliens who violated federal immigration law. The purpose was to have them naturalized as Democratic voters and then have their parents follow suit. It supposedly delays the deportation of people who came to the U.S. as children if they do not have documentation. That has now become permanent, and they get free taxpayer education and work permits. The second part was the scheme to create a false dossier on Trump, paid for by the Democrat National Committee and Hillary Clinton, claiming sources could prove Trump had committed serious federal law violations and even international crimes. This was all later proven to be false.
I saw the information, I read the information outside of that meeting. It's all fake news, it's phony stuff. It didn't happen.
But the liberal Obama-friendly media ran with it, and to this day, they still continue to support this lie. This led to a 3-year, $30 million taxpayer-funded false flag investigation initiated by the FBI and Director James Comey, filing 4 illegal and falsified FISA warrants to justify spying on the Trump administration once he was in the White House. The Obama administration was mired in scandal, but with the assistance of the liberal media, there was a great attempt to cover these events up. Logical people know better, and Hillary Clinton lost the election as a result of much of this corruption coming to light.
Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.